Welcome back to the Driven Leadership Podcast, everybody. We're back with Mary and Eric and Austin. We don't do this a lot. How's everybody feeling today? What's the vibes like?
It's Friday.
It's Friday.
And it's
fun Friday.
It's Friday.
And we're going to talk about conflict.
So stoked.
You know, so all morning I've been wearing a sweatshirt because it's about 45 degrees out and cloudy, and you know we're setting into the winter months here up in the Pacific Northwest, and it kind of changes everything. It gets kind of socked in, kind of. You guys are feeling that there in Louisiana, right?
I hate everything you're saying. It's so annoying.
It's a little gray.
I know it's not like this because we did a class, a summit class online program yesterday, and Austin is facilitating, and we're on one of the breaks, and Austin shows his shirt, and his air conditioner went out in this room he's in. I'm assuming it's still out, and you're just still sweating today.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. So he was just soaked all the way through, and I gotta say,
was turning a different color.
yeah, so I'm rubbing it in. I am.
Yeah, I feel that. It's okay. Yeah, it's real hot, but it's great. Every time I do a podcast or a long training or session for Summit, I lose about 5 pounds. So it's really awesome.
It's a new weight loss program.
It's my new weight loss program. I just
working,
do this.
Working in a sauna.
Working in a sauna. It's really nice. Except for my chair smells now. I might just throw it away.
That was not needed.
Don't
No.
need that
not
visual.
However, we've got a new business. Bikram Leadership Development. That's right. Bikram Yoga. Y'all don't have that in Louisiana?
No, we
The
just
hot
call it
yoga?
hot. We just call it
hot yoga.
Bikram's
yoga.
like the originator of hot yoga.
Bikram sounds dirty. Like
Bikram? Bikram?
Bikram
Okay.
sounds more
I don't know where
accurate.
you're at. It
But
is
if you
Friday,
said,
clearly.
Hey,
It sounds
man,
like
you wanna
Birkenstocks.
Yeah.
come see my Bikram?
Okay.
Nope. Nope. Okay, we can edit that part, Connor.
We're going to have to. Well, as Mary has alluded to, we are talking about conflict today. First time we've talked about it on the podcast. And I just want to set some kind of vision for the episode. I know, Eric, you put this idea on our idea board for the podcast. So we're talking, there's obviously so much we can talk about conflict. Today we're talking about being conflict effective. So when you put the idea down on the board, Eric, what's your mindset around the goal of what we're going to talk about today?
Well, so conflict effective is it's really a term that came up. So gosh, years ago now, we have just a real interesting story how we at Driven got into conflict development, conflict resolution, all of that. And it was, we were looking to put a segment on conflict in our Advantage communication course. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started looking around, and everything kept pointing back to this TKI Ralph Kilman conflict model. And it was international, and it was taught in colleges, and it was like, it was the thing, right? So we're like, okay. And they just happen to be holding a conflict class within a few hours of us where we actually live. And I got on the phone with Mary, and I'm like, Mary, you got to go to this one because these are the people, and it just happened to be right around the corner. Well,
And I'm literally coming out of Bold. Like, I'm coming down the mountain.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, no, you need to go to Victoria, Canada tomorrow.
typically, you know, when you're coming out of Bold as a facilitator, you'd need a couple of days to be in a coma. I mean, you're exhausted coming out of that thing. So she agrees to go, and Amber, her daughter, goes with her. And Amber's awesome. They have a great time anytime they go learn something. So they're like, okay, they're off little learning buddies, and so it turns into a fun girls trip. And they go up into Canada, and they go in this training class, and they sit at a table up near the front, and there's this little kind older gentleman that's just sitting there at the table as this is going on. Well, as it goes through, they find out they're sitting next to the infamous Ralph Kilman. And
Okay.
for those that don't know,
Amber
Ralph
and I at the table. Like, this is...
Yeah. So
He's with
Ralph Kilman, when it comes to conflict, is like Einstein is to physics. Like, it's like
Wow.
you're sitting at the table with the grand poobah of conflict. He's taught it for years. He's made it an internationally known thing. She didn't know that, so they're just hanging out, just doing the Mary and Amber thing, and they're talking away. And
I can't wait to be the grand poobah of something or whatever.
Right?
I think that should be on my vision board. Just a big old grand poobah.
Okay, so I don't even know if that's a real term. That's something my mom used to say growing up. Grand poobah.
I love it.
So anyway, they hit it off, and they just do, and the guy's amazing. They later find out who he is and kind of what's going on there, and then you talk about just things aligning back to back. So the training aligns. They sit at the table with Ralph. They strike a conversation. They get along great. We come back, and then our largest client goes, "Hey, we're looking for training around conflict. Noticed, Mary, that you're connected to Ralph Kilman on LinkedIn. How do you know him?" And so, they start striking up a conversation. And bottom line, Ralph Kilman, the person that trained his live classes, he just parted company with almost immediately after the training they were in. And this company we work with is looking for conflict classes and says, "Hey, if you know him, see if he'll let you teach the conflict classes," because he has nobody to teach it. He's in his 70s. He's done. He doesn't want to be live facilitating. He doesn't even go out and visit trainings anymore. So the fact that he went out to that one training, they happened to be there, was completely crazy.
Yeah.
So anyway, next thing we know, Mary and I are sitting in his home. His home he calls Camelot. Okay.
That's what he calls his house?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. That's what he calls his house.
That's the bottom right corner of my vision board. So in the middle is Grand Poobah, and the bottom is Camelot.
And then Camelot.
Okay, well, I'm telling you, you'd have to. Ralph is one of the coolest. Like, he's deep thinker beyond. Like, the guy, and just when you get to know him, kind, considerate, caring, and just really
funny.
At the end of the day, he's hilarious. At the end of the day, he just wants this work he spent his entire life on to be out there, and it's prolifically out there. But long after he goes, so long story short, we wind up becoming his facilitators for live events for all of North America. And it happened over a couple months. We were able to facilitate and do that. For years now, we've been training conflict and his methodology of and to say, so we've had the opportunity to be privately mentored by him, been walked through not only his work, but how to facilitate his work, where the connection points are. When we get hung up or stuck, he's there to kind of go, okay, this is where we take this. This is what you do with this. And so it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of like, if we were going to race car driving, we got Mario Andretti sitting in the passenger seat with us going, no, turn left here, do this, the whole way through. And it's been remarkable. And so when we came to Conflict Effective, it was after years of working with his work, and the terms that were out there were like conflict resolution and, all these different things. That the reality is, what we want people to be effective at conflict. Conflict is inevitable. It happens all the time. And as Ralph would say, it is how a organization handles conflict or team handles conflict really is the pulse of the healthiness of that team. And there's a lot of teams that are out there and they're avoiding conflict. There's a lot of teams that are out there that are just, surrendering to whatever or accommodating the outcomes that are taking place. Yeah. There are very few that are able to pick the right conflict mode, step into it, execute it at a high level, and be healthy and effective in dealing with the different points of views. So being effective with conflict is ultimately, when we're training a class or we're working with it, it's not about coming to resolution, because sometimes conflict opens more conflict. Yeah. And that's the healthy course it needs to be on. Sometimes it's resolution. Sometimes it's being effective in what the conflict needs, what the culture needs, what the situation needs. And so anyway, that was the longest answer I could possibly give you, but it's the backstory on how we got into this, and I dare say became experts at this. But it's a really cool story, but it's also remarkable how many organizations and teams are really bad at conflict.
Well, yeah, because really the default, especially in every business I've been in, is to de-escalate conflict as soon as possible. You just address it face on so that it can be diminished and you move on from it. But changing that narrative to being conflict effective is I mean, huge. And it's very new to me as well. So, Mary, what's your perspective on it, or what would you hope to gain out of this podcast for listeners?
It's interesting because that whole story, I always say everything we do and everything we don't do has a ripple effect. And I remember sitting in the conflict class, and to Eric's point, a lot of people think conflict is bad. And I remember what Ralph said is that there's no goodness or badness about conflict. It's our interpretation. It's the meaning that we give to it. There's a quote that says from Max Lucado, conflict is inevitable, combat is optional. And so many times, it is. There's conflict everywhere, and it is differences of opinions, difference of ideas, different viewpoints, and it's not good or bad, right or wrong. It's how do we effectively manage it? And so to give people tools and to understand that is so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that conflict effective and using that terminology affects, no pun intended there, but so many different things than just the health and the culture of the organization. I mean, you can do a quick Google search of how much conflict is costing the world, costing businesses in the United States. $359 billion annually is what it's costing. And that's how they're equating that is 2.38 hours per week employees spend on
dealing with conflict. Yeah.
That's just a massive amount of time to not be effective in something.
That's all they're saying is that 2 hours a week is in conflict.
2.3 hours is average across the board based upon this Workplace Institute.
I'm pretty sure I'm averaging that per day.
I heard another one.
Eric's calling BS on the stats.
I did. I heard, and this was actually from Ralph, a study he pulled, that managers spend over 25% every day on average in conflict.
Well,
I
just
a day.
Yeah. Is there a difference there between team members and managers? The stat that like Austin's pulling, because I mean, would you?
I just think it's fun to make his stat wrong because he's pulling from an actual like research study. So
no, I'm comfortable saying the statistic is incorrect. I'm joking.
No, but you know, personally targeted here, and I think we need to enter into some conflict. Okay, I'm in my 25%. All right, there we go.
Enter the combat zone. We tricked everybody.
Actually, when I ask that question when we're doing live facilitation, and I'll say, by show of hands, how many of you would say you're 25%? Hands go up. How many would say 50? I've had people say that on average, depending on their role, over 80% of their role is in conflict. I'm like, holy cow.
Just dealing with it.
To deal with it.
And going with your numbers, because there's some stats there in that if it was only 2 hours a week, and we're saying it's a lot more, then obviously the cost gets into the trillions real quick. I mean, that's your point, it's very expensive to all of us. Yeah. And the reality is conflict has lingering traces. You get in a heavy conflict and it sits with you and you carry it through your workday and it just kind of ripples into everything else. It depends on the level of conflict. So handling conflict in a healthy way, the output is just unbelievable when people do it well.
Now, have y'all seen, I want to get into some practical tools and maybe even some case studies on companies that y'all have worked with. Is there a initial resistance to the idea of being effective with conflict? Rather, whenever you go into companies, are they expecting the training to be on how to resolve and dissolve conflict? And so is there ever any pushback on like, no, we don't want to, we just want to know how to get rid of it? Or is it mostly people are open to the idea of being effective and working through it?
No, people want to. It's just sometimes they feel like it's out of their control. So they get frustrated. So we give them all these tools. But what I hear is, well, the management or the leadership, they're not going to change. So we get them to focus on what they can control, not what they can't. Yeah. And then, of course, getting into different modalities and the best approach.
I think most people want to get better, at working through conflict, and any tools they're excited about learning about. Because the reality is most of us deal with conflict, and we the way we deal with conflict is based on our upbringing. We learn to deal with conflict usually from, in most cases, our parents or our caregivers and how they dealt with conflict. So like my dad, God love him, but he that guy didn't handle conflict well. It was kind of like he had either kind and almost submissive or volatile, right? And I found as I entered the workplace, I didn't get my way, have that extreme end and go to volatile. Well, you can run people over and do it. And I learned certain survival skills that were connected to competing, right? When you get into Ralph Kilman's and the reality was that wasn't effective in most cases. Some cases it was. And because it was effective in some cases, I used a one size fits all and didn't have the ability to expand my ability to match the situation I'm walking into. So I feel like most people are very interested in learning new techniques. I don't know that it's as easy to apply new techniques unless you really want to. And I'd say that's learning in general, right? If we want to learn and change, then we kind of hold ourselves accountable and we have discipline because there's something in it for us. But when it's, wow, you mean for me to be good at conflict, I don't get to come in and yell at my team? Well, I'd rather yell at my team. That's too much work. And the reality is some people are in that spot. Hopefully not somebody you work with, but that is reality for some. So it's, or you go the other end and it's, somebody's a heavy avoider. They avoid conflict at all costs. And for them to not avoid conflict, they're going to have to deal with people coming at them and the actual conflict of it. And that's too overwhelming. And they're like, I can't go there. So if somebody wants to, they can definitely change in this.
Yeah.
Well, and it really is self-awareness. So when I look at becoming conflict effective, it first and foremost starts with us. We have to be aware. What is our beliefs? We get into emotional intelligence. Anything that we do prior, because you have to recognize your own triggers, understand others, so that you can deal more. Because if you just come into a conflict and you're not aware, we're usually hijacked. Conflict, there's a lot of times there's an emotional thing.
Yeah.
So what's your belief around this story? And we come usually from our perspective and really learning to say, okay, this is what I need, but let me look at someone else's perspective. If I can put myself in their shoes and really seek to understand, and that's hard, because especially when you're hijacked, the last thing you want is to look through another lens, because we're right. Yeah. Do you want to be right, or do you want a solution?
Yeah. So when it comes to that first step of figuring out your own perspective, your own triggers, how does someone go about doing that outside of deep therapy?
Come and see Mary.
Come and see Mary. I don't know if you want to take that one, Mary, but I'll just throw my 2 cents in since I already started talking. I actually think figuring out your triggers is not that hard. It's wherever you experience high emotion and you start looking for connective patterns. Every time I walk in the house and the house is a mess and the kids are running around and whatever, right? I lose it on the kids. Okay. Making that up. I don't have small kids around the house, but now it's doing the actual internal work. It's like going, okay, so what about this is causing me to experience high emotion? In this case, probably anger. And I'm going, okay, why am I angry? And the initial layer might be, I come in, I've had a hard day, and then it's pure chaos, and I just want this to look right, or I just want it to be simple, or I just want whatever's going on. That might be the first layer. Now you got to go a little deeper than that. Well, why does my children being in this state or whatever's going on, why does that make me feel this way, right? And that might be another layer. And then what is it? When did I start originally really starting to feel this way? Why does this type of thing, and I start to see patterns where that links in. I go into work and my desk is a mess and it throws me sideways, or I go in and people aren't organized and making things happen. I start to see these patterns of, oh, I need stability desperately in my life. And when stability's not there, I feel out of control. Therefore, whenever I feel out of control, I lose my shit. And so now it's no longer the real trigger that's going on underneath. If you really do the work there, is like going, wow, I need control. Why do I need control? Because my life didn't feel very controlling growing up, or very controlled. So I did that to make it feel for what I needed. I needed stability. So I get a shrink can get you there. I get going to a counselor, which I highly recommend.
Yeah.
But I'd also say we can kind of self-diagnose if you really want to dig in.
A couple hours with the journal will do a lot of work.
But it really does. And the
or
crazy
even
thing,
asking people around you, the people who are closest to you, where do you see me get triggered?
Yeah. What sets me off?
Right.
They'll answer pretty quick.
Oh, they know exactly what it is. And then they'll also know what we call the fuel of choice. So it's your emotional, when I say fuel of choice, it's your go-to. So when you're in a heightened state, when you're triggered, what is that emotional state that you go to? And they can tell you. I shut down. Like I go numb, I disconnect, and then I'm, woo, you don't want to push me. Eric's volatile.
that sounds great. Thank you. Really sounds great.
You're very volatile, Eric.
Can you explain that further?
No, I think we can just leave it there. Austin, any thoughts?
Actually, I do have one thought before we go into what volatile means for Eric, and how he handles conflict.
Thanks.
Because I'm so curious of this.
I hope we never come back to it.
We can make that happen. I do want to just say one thing, and this is not to correct Eric or in any way, because I just know his heart. We've talked about this a lot through different trainings and different things. You said the word easy there. You said, this is easy. And I want to just transfer that word, because I know your heart there, and I don't want anybody listening on the other end to go like, oh, it's easy. I can identify my triggers. It is simple of a process. It is extremely hard to do, because in an emotional heightened sense, you have no ability to separate logical thought from emotional triggered response. If you're hijacked, you don't have the ability to logically think through what led me here, why did I get here? And so even, in my closest relationships with people through my childhood and my own traumas and my own experiences and through therapies, my wife knows what to ask me in that moment to make me get out of that place and go, okay, what's really going on here? But that wasn't easy, because I had to face me. And that's never an easy process, especially if it's not a very pretty one, which I don't know about you guys, but it's not always very pretty to look deep in there. And so just wanted to kind of clarify, if you're not like Eric and it's not easy for you to go down deep in there. And,
no. Actually, really glad you said that, and didn't actually even mean, you're right. What you said is it's not easy. No. Simple process is what I meant, is that, and the truth is, if we get in the habit of doing, I always steal this from the military, but the after action report, right? So something happens, and exactly like you said, when we're in the moment, it's not going to happen. We're triggered. Our brain can't even do that. It can't process it the way we need to. We got to get out of that state. And then when we're out of the state and we're calm, go back and actually look at it. And if that's the process and we start doing that and we're consistently doing that, what I mean is you'll start to grow really quickly. You'll start to see your triggers. You'll start to see the patterns, because you want to.
You'll be more comfortable with it, with just the process of self-reflection. And if you keep that habit up, then it does wonders for you. Yeah.
But most of us don't want to do that. Most of us want to afterwards just kind of blame it on someone else or put it somewhere else. And the reality is, I saw this years ago, and it was I think it was labeled as like the keys to a happy marriage. And it was like, who's responsible for the communication in the marriage? And, I literally, my mental response was like, well, it's 50-50, right? She's responsible for 50%. I'm responsible for 50%. And with this thing, I forget how it was worded, but the answer was 100-100.
100.
And so it's like something doesn't go right immediately. As soon as I'm in a state of mind to do it and go, okay, what did I do to create that? How did I impact that? And it may not even been in the moment. I may have done something a week before that set this up. And as soon as I start taking ownership of that, then I start having awareness around it. I start understanding, and triggers
and regardless of what other people are doing, i.e., team members and you're a manager, regardless of whether the team members are hitting 100% of their communication, if you're coming to the table with 100% communication, then that's going to change the tide. What were you going to say, Mary?
Yeah.
No, I was just going back into being effective with conflict. So when we first learned the TKI, the Thomas Kilmann instrument, there's 5 different modalities or behaviors of choice that you can choose when you're looking at a conflict.
Yeah.
So competing is, win-lose. It's important to me. It's not important to someone else. And so you're standing up, right? But you have to be careful. So we're going to go super high level here.
Yep.
Accommodating is opposite. It is, if you think of like a lose-win, so it's usually more important to someone else. So you're accommodating. So you're not pushing back. You're not really stating your ideas or opinions or letting them win. Avoiding, no one's needs are being met, so it's lose-lose. You're not addressing the conflict. Compromise, it's important to both people somewhat, but you both want a little skin in the game, but it's not a win-win because all your needs are not being met. And then collaboration takes so much time. And I've heard companies say, we need a collaborative culture. Well, there are so many things that have to be in play before you ever have a collaborative culture. You have to have psychological safety. You can't have stress. Stress has to be invigorating. You need time, the relationship, all of this is there. So it's one thing to understand and recognize which mode to use, but when and how. And so when we were looking at this, and then we got into the emotional intelligence part and the triggers and our beliefs, because underneath that entire pattern, when you're in a conflict, it goes back into, what is my assumption? What is my belief around this? What is someone else's belief around it? And so if you're just going into, well, I'm going to compete right now because it's so important to me, but I haven't done the work to find out really where someone else is coming from, because their upbringing, or maybe they've been within a company where they were taught, you never rock that boat. Do not push back. And so they might have a very strong opinion, yet they were taught, I'm not going to say anything. So now they've gone into accommodation. But what happens is they will disengage because their voice isn't heard, their ideas aren't heard. And now you got these patterns. So when we started really doing this and paying attention to the emotion, because what we're doing when you're in a conflict with someone, it's not the words that we say, right? It's how we say it, but it's our body language and it's our tone. And you can watch and you can ask questions, what's going on? And when we started really putting all of this together and the fuel of choice came up and paying attention to triggers, I have a funny story. And I love Eric to pieces, and I know I pick on you just because we have so many opposite or amazing
when you start
stories.
off by having to tell people that you love me, I don't know what story you're about to tell, but I'm a little nervous.
No. So
is it about his volatile nature?
I'm like, we still have a circle back. We need to talk about that.
So we take the TKI, and Eric is like so high in the competing and accommodating. He is a 3, right?
Yeah.
He's a 3, which means so opposite. He wants to address it right away. People who accommodate, they want to win. His avoiding is a 3. He doesn't want to avoid. It's either I'm going to win.
What's the scale we're working with here? Like, was it 0 to 10?
0 to 100.
0 to 100.
0 to 100.
0 to 100.
Yeah, I'm a 3 avoider.
Yeah, he ain't doing that.
Yeah.
No.
And so, but what we realized,
but it doesn't make me volatile.
No.
I was going to say, that is actually what makes you volatile.
But it's understanding this because
Can we change volatile to assertive? Like, can that?
Yeah, we can use assertive.
Okay.
So
But we all know what we mean.
it's
Okay, I'm ruining your story.
We
sorry,
gotta let
Mary.
Mary finish her.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So we're in a conflict, and yes, to our listeners, Eric and I are married. So you run a company. Who's your baby? Being married the same time you've started your company. I mean, there's a lot of healthy conflict.
I don't. I'm right. You're wrong. I don't see why.
Conflict's easy.
Volatile.
Assertive.
So, back to my story. There was a situation where we were putting a class together. So this is in the entire time that we're learning this conflict, aware of the conflict model. And I'm at my desk, and he opens up my office door, and he shuts the door, and he sits at my door. I need to avoid the conflict right now. I'm stressed out. I don't have time, and he wants to address the conflict.
Mm.
Do you think a little volatile showed up? But it was on my end.
Yeah.
Because what happens is when someone is in conflict, so someone's need is not being met. And
everyone heard that. She's volatile. Everybody heard that.
I did.
It sounds like we're hitting each other. That is not the case, everyone. That's not a thing.
But it's so I say this because when you go into a conflict, and if you have a coworker, okay, or a significant other, who is in the middle of something, and stress is high, they don't have time. The last thing you ever want to do is address the conflict then. That's not effective way to manage the conflict. It is right. But it's how do we do this? But when we have healthy time to do this.
Yeah.
And teaching people and teaching Eric, actually we got Ralph involved with this. He said, Eric, it's okay to avoid conflict as long as you come back to it. And for the people who conflict's important or their ideas are important, but they're not addressing it, you will never solve it. You have to know when to pivot, when to shift, when to adjust. And you have to be aware of the emotion, aware of the triggers, where you're at to get in a healthy space so that you can effectively work through it.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. As I got certified in the TKI, one of the biggest things that stuck out to me was, Austin, you have a choice. Like you don't, like, not every conflict is the same, should be treated the same, is responsively the same. And you know that in your mind. But when things happen, it's like, I'm going to treat almost everyone the same. Even if I've been in leadership and management and all these things for years, and I know that every person has to be communicated to differently, and you communicate to that individual. But when conflict arises, it's like, we're going to sit down at this table, but we're going to lay it all out. We're going to deal with it right here. And that is what I've learned in 10 years of marriage. That is not effective. What I've learned in years of friendships and in different opportunities with businesses and partners and all the things.
Not effective all the time.
It's not effective all the time. That's a great caveat there. But also we do have a choice in it. We can choose. And I think just to kind of say this, my TKI looks a lot like Eric's. I'm very high on the competing and collaborating and nothing else. So I either want to talk about it with you or I want to talk about it to you. I don't. That's it. That's it. So my wife is the exact opposite. And actually, a lot of my friends are the exact opposite. Some of my greatest coworkers that I've had are the exact opposite. And what's interesting that I've figured out over being certified through this shorter period of time is there's power in that waiting. But for me, growing up, I wasn't. If we didn't talk about it right there, it was never talked about.
Or for some people, they respond in how they're like, oh, well, we did it this way, so I don't want to do it that way, so I'm going to address it face on and try to be the opposite, but then that's not healthy. So am I hearing in this, because again, I am the naive one in all this, I haven't been certified yet, am I hearing that, like, when it comes time for conflict, there is a choice to be made as a leader to choose what modality to operate in, depending on the circumstances and the people involved? Okay.
Absolutely.
Ralph actually has 8 questions you go through. If you've got, you can actually go through and it'll spit out what mode to use.
Oh wow.
The challenge with it is you really the first thing, which Mary already said, is you got to be in a state of mind where you're willing to evaluate what type of conflict should I use.
Yeah.
You know, so it's if you're not in that state of mind, what you're going to do is just use what you've always done. You're going to go back to your default, and
everything is the hammer. This is the hammer, and everything is the nail. This is what I'm going to do. Well,
right.
And I actually want to bring all this together because we started talking about the emotional intelligence and the triggers, how to use different modes. But when I said you have to know the emotional response, and especially the people around you. So when you know your fuel of choice, and with Eric, knowing anger was the emotion that comes out. So as soon as I see that, I know something's happening on the inside. And I'll ask him, hey, what's going on right now? Did I do something? Did something set you off? And so we've had this awareness around how to treat so that we can address it differently. Mm-hmm. He knows that when I shut down, hey, what's going on? But we do that with everyone. When you know your team members' emotions, when you know the triggers, when you're in a place of conflict, there's a different conversation that can happen first before you ever go to resolve the conflict. Hey, I care about you as a person. Sometimes we just need to be listened to, right? We need to be seen. We need to be heard. We need to know that we're safe. We need to know that it's okay to have a different set of opinion. And it's not about being right or wrong. It's an idea. It's an opinion. Yeah. Now, how do we create something that can create more win-wins?
So when it comes to leaders understanding their team, is the way about it to like the Intermetrics or like any of the other personality tests, is it to give these assessments to their team, get all the feedback, and now you understand how to deal with each team member?
I'm not sure do you need to take the TKI to be able to use this? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
No, you don't. But you do need to understand at least enough about conflict to know. I mean, Mary just gave the 5 modalities, right? So the understanding that every conflict we go into may not be the same conflict, and understanding the different things that are impacting that conflict. We have to have a way of breaking that down to really, some people are just naturally good at it. You'll meet someone, usually they have a higher emotional intelligence, mm-hmm. which is part of that is just being able to interpret someone else and the data points they're putting off, knowing if they're already upset, knowing potentially why they're upset, because knowing their triggers and things of that nature. People that are really more emotionally intelligent and aware, they pick up on that very easily. Other people, the normal human out there, may not notice those or be as aware of what's going on. And so then we start stepping into situations where we're triggering people more often and we don't know why. Mm-hmm. And so you could have all the information on how to handle a conflict and it'll help. But if you're emotionally unaware, you're gonna have more conflict, and you won't know why. It's like so emotional intelligence is, you got to be able to read and interpret what's going on with them, what they're feeling, what's taking place, and empathize, have the ability to actually put yourself in their perspective and see it from their direction. Mm-hmm. And then it's the internal side as well, the ability to know, what am I feeling and why did that trigger me, and to self-manage it. Even though I'm upset, being able to manage that so that I can logically think through that process, because what's going on in the brain is when we're triggered, it's firing the amygdala, we're bypassing the prefrontal lobe, and we don't have the ability to analytically problem solve. So if you can't at least keep your brain engaged fully, you're going to be going at partial capacity. So to answer your question, the easy place to start before you know a lot of this is how do I grow? That's why we started this whole conversation about the self-awareness part, right? Years ago, we had an opportunity to do at the time it was a communication class with a group of miners. Okay. Miners meaning people who mine for a living. They mine.
I thought you were thinking like the age of 15.
Not young children. Actually,
we've done work with teens before, so I thought you were just talking about miners
it was a gold mine.
Gold miners.
I thought it was
the ground.
And this is years ago. I actually thought it was a platinum mine, palladium, wasn't it?
Oh, we did platinum, palladium, and we did gold.
Okay. So we did both.
Communication classes with both of them. Yeah.
So we get a chance to tour this place, and you're walking by these trucks with these tires enormous, and all these things are going on. But what they had one shift that would leave, and the people that they hired, typically this was up in northern Nevada. The people that worked there were seeking a job where they didn't really have to deal with people. They usually grew up in small towns with small families, didn't have a big network of people. And in general, people that haven't had a lot of contact with a whole lot of people, they do not develop as much emotional intelligence because they just don't practice it as much.
Yeah.
And so these people had much lower emotional intelligence when they took the assessments. They were super low on the score in that. And it was, so you could teach them all the communication you wanted to. The goal of this was to make it so they would communicate enough to tell the group that was leaving at 3:00 in the morning would tell the group that was arriving what was happening so that it was safer, because they just had a fatality in there because they weren't communicating well.
Oh, wow.
And you can imagine that training, we can give them all the tools we want to. Where it needed to spend the time on was on the awareness piece before they learned about conflict, before they learned about personalities, before they learned about that. Because without the awareness, it gets really hard. So I'm just saying that to the audience, is that if you want a place to start, and this is all brand new, start digging in. Read personal development books that get you thinking about you and understand what you're feeling and what's going on and what are your triggers. And,
Emotional Intelligence 2.0 is a great book to start.
Great start. So there's all these things you can do prior to start getting your hands around it. However, most people have some skill within this, and then when you learn the tools and you start applying them, you get quicker rapidly.
So one tool, a tool for anyone, when you are in conflict, you never, ever, ever go after solving it if tempers are high. If you are in an emotional state, in a hijacked emotional state, tempers are high, pause, avoid. And that doesn't mean that you don't ever address it, but give yourself, I always say, the adult timeout. Go outside, take a walk, breathe, write. Sometimes people go to address a conflict in an email or a text. That's the last thing don't send it.
Yeah.
You can write it, walk away from it, come back, calm down, then look at it again. So that's my go-to whenever I look at conflict. If tempers are high, you are not solving, managing, resolving anything. You've got to get that together first.
Yeah,
well, I think it's really interesting, and I want to go back kind of all the way to the beginning here and just kind of where we are now, and go. Gallup's work, we've talked about it a lot on this podcast, but we were looking at the State of the Union the other day, me, you, and Eric.
State of the American workforce.
State of the Union address. More to come on that. I'm just kidding. State of the American workforce. We were looking at the new report the other day, and I just noticed this stat of over 50% of workers are in a constant state of stress.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's crazy to think about, but then we go down to what you're saying is like, if you're tempered or if you're in a heightened state or if you're in a stressful state, and we go, okay, why is this so important? Is because we don't have the luxury of people actually being stable and calm and not stressed. More than likely, 1 out of 2 chances you're going to get a stressed individual, and that's going to heighten the emotional response. And in the same world, the majority of our teams at this point in the workforce have experienced some type of workplace trauma. Now, I'm not meaning like everything has to be to the nth degree of extreme.
But like Eric and his volatility.
Yeah, like Eric and his volatility. Nothing has to be extreme like that. But what I'm saying is, it's like everyone's experienced something that has harmed them or their response or their understanding to conflict. So you have this massive dichotomy of stressed employees, stress tensions, and previous trauma when it comes to some type of interpersonal relationship with managers, because people leave because of managers' experiences. So if they're coming into a new business or they're in a new business, it's because something happened majority of the time.
It develops a learned behavior of how to deal with conflict. And the tricky thing is, every individual has a different learned behavior. So like we said at the beginning, like you can't expect everyone to deal with conflict in the same way. No two people will do it, because if every conflict you've personally had influences how you do it the next time.
Yeah, and I guess I was saying all that to say, to your point, Connor, earlier, how do you learn it? Do you develop from it?
Do you have to take all the tests and the assessments?
You start.
No.
I think you start to Eric's point. You start with emotional intelligence. To Mary's point, you focus on yourself, and you get better in that world. to be able to better interact with other people and understand where they're coming from. I think just in general of conflict, we have to just have the base understanding that people are people, and hurt people, and that it's going to get messy, and we got to be okay with that. Because if we are just, if our goal in our business is to just create peace all the time, that's not solving conflict, and it's not actually going to produce a result. It's either just going to remove people out of the business, or it's just going to stagnate the business. And so just, we talked about a lot. I just want to kind of
that's not conflict effective either. Yeah. So go ahead, Mary.
No, I just want to address something regarding the TKI tool. So yes, it's powerful to take an assessment. However, you have to be careful because the TKI tool is not a personality assessment. It is a behavior assessment. And it gives you a baseline on how you typically like to behave in a conflict at work, at home, and it's different. But the thing is, you can shift. And that's the whole thing behind the TKI is awareness of your behavior. So when our highs are highs and our lows are lows, how do we work more to bring that balance so that we know how to work between them? Because a lot of people will go, oh, I'm just high competing, just deal with it. No, that's your go-to, and that's the one that's comfortable, yet recognize there's other modalities, there's other behaviors. And so we're super careful on, yes, if you take a tool like that, it is to help create awareness for yourself and for your teams.
Yeah, it was mind-blowing to know that Ralph said the goal is the opposite of mine.
Which is in the middle.
Which is like everybody's in the, if every mode was in the middle, then you're operating in all of them equally or situationally. And
you know how to use it, right?
And I was like, man, that sucks. That means I failed. But it's totally counterintuitive to what normal assessments are, right? This is who you are. Rather, this is just how you're showing up consistently.
For those listening, Austin did not fail. He's just not good at conflict, is what that said.
No, I'm just not good at avoiding or accommodating. That's it.
Yeah. Austin likes conflict.
He's either
on purpose.
Overusing certain modes or underusing. That's all that says. Yeah. So.
That's so funny.
And then in regards to conflict, a lot of times, and we'll ask people, so what does conflict look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? And across the board, every single time I'll get angry, frustrated. It's like all the negative emotions. Yet conflict can be good. Yeah. It can be creative and fun. And again, it goes back into, do we know, is there healthy respect around people? Are we truly seeking to understand how to effectively work through this? Or is it, I'm right, you're wrong, And so when we really look at it, you want conflict. You want the healthy kind.
Yeah. Well, if you can believe it, we've been talking for 50 minutes. So I think we're gonna land the plane here. There's a lot to be said. I want to hear, maybe in the next episode that we do about conflict, I want to hear some of the success stories behind the trainings that we've done, and how teams can turn the tide in this. And I would recommend to our listeners, go watch the video version of this to watch Austin descend into a pool of sweat throughout the episode. I think we're going to mostly stop to give him a break.
Droop here in the front from the weight of the sweat in his shirt.
I'm not going to lie, guys. I'm dying in here.
Man.
It's getting hot.
Yeah. And I'm like, give me a heater. I got a jacket on.
Yeah, thanks. Love that one in, Mary.
Oh, man. Well, look, thanks for listening, everybody. We hope nothing but the best for conflict in you and your team. Reach out to us if you want any more information on TKI conflict training. We can come to you in person, or we can do it online.
We also have the Summit one starting.
Summit, gain your way to the top. See you next episode, everybody.
I'll have it.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Your way to the top.
Oh man, have a great week, everybody.
Connor, you need to open a side company of jingles for their
I'll start ripping them out. Give me anything, and I'll just rip it out.